There is a quiet truth you are rarely told. Most of the things you are worrying about right now are already being taken care of. Not loudly, not urgently, but silently, patiently, in ways you cannot yet see. Life does not need your panic to move forward. It needs your trust. The moment you loosen your grip on fear, something subtle shifts. The mind softens, the heart slows, and suddenly, what felt stuck begins to breathe again. If you can stay here for a few minutes and listen with stillness instead of fear, you may realize that nothing is falling apart. Everything is quietly falling into place. 1. Worry comes from wanting control over what is not yours. Buddhism teaches that suffering begins the moment we try to control what was never meant to be controlled. Much of our worry does not come from real danger, but from the belief that we must manage everything in order to feel safe. The mind becomes restless when it tries to predict outcomes, fix the future, or guarantee certainty in a world that is constantly changing. Worry is not wisdom, it is not preparation. It is the mind's desperate attempt to dominate time and bend life to its preferences. When you worry, you are not living in reality. You are arguing with a future that has not yet arrived. You replay imagined conversations, rehearse worst-case scenarios, and mentally fight battles that may never take place. This constant inner struggle drains your energy and steals peace from the only moment that truly exists, which is now. Life does not require your tension to function. The universe has been unfolding long before your fears existed. The sun rises every morning without your permission. The seasons shift without asking for your approval. The heart inside your chest beats faithfully, day and night, without waiting for your instructions. Yet the mind behaves as if everything will collapse unless it stays anxious. Buddhism gently reminds us that this belief is an illusion. Control over impermanent things was never yours to hold. People change. Circumstances change. Emotions rise and fall. Trying to freeze them through worry only creates resistance, and resistance is where suffering grows. When you stop worrying, you are not becoming careless or irresponsible. You are not abandoning effort or ignoring reality. You are simply returning responsibility to where it belongs. You take care of what is actually within your reach, your actions, your intentions, your attitude in this moment, and you release what has not yet arrived. You stop carrying the weight of outcomes that are shaped by countless forces beyond your control. This shift does not make you weaker, it makes you grounded. It allows your energy to flow into what you can genuinely influence instead of being scattered across imagined fears. Letting go of the illusion of control is not surrendering to chaos. It is aligning with how life truly works. When you loosen your grip, life does not become more dangerous, it becomes more cooperative. Opportunities become clearer because fear is no longer clouding your vision. Decisions become simpler because the mind is no longer overloaded with anxiety. Peace begins to replace tension, not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer fighting what was never yours to command. When you trust life a little more, you stop moving against the current, and in that alignment, things begin to unfold with less resistance and more ease. 2. Everything unfolds in its own time, not your fear's timeline. One of the greatest sources of worry is the belief that life is late. The mind constantly whispers that things should already be fixed, already clear, already settled. You worry because you feel behind, because answers have not arrived yet, because progress seems slower than your fear demands. Buddhism teaches that impatience is often fear wearing the mask of urgency. The mind does not suffer because life is slow. It suffers because it demands speed from something that moves according to a deeper rhythm. When you measure life using anxiety as a clock, everything feels delayed. But life does not follow the timeline created by your worries. It follows its own natural order. In nature, nothing grows before it is ready. A flower does not bloom the moment the seed touches the soil. Roots must form first, unseen and uncelebrated. The same is true for your life. Many things that appear stuck are quietly developing beneath the surface. Buddhism reminds us that what you call delay is often preparation. What you call waiting is often protection. If certain things arrive too early, they would overwhelm you, confuse you, or even harm you. Yet the worried mind cannot see this. It only sees absence and interprets it as failure. When you worry about timing, you are assuming that you know exactly when things should happen. This belief places an unbearable burden on the mind. It turns every moment into a judgment. Too slow, too late, not enough. But life does not operate on comparison or fear. It unfolds through cause and effect. Every experience you are living now is shaping you for what comes next, even if the connection is not yet visible. Buddhism teaches patience not as passive waiting, but as deep trust in the unseen process. When you stop worrying about when things will happen, something remarkable occurs. Your attention returns to the present. Instead of mentally chasing the future, you begin to live where you are. You act more calmly. You respond more wisely. You stop forcing progress and allow it to emerge naturally. This does not mean you stop making effort. It means your effort is no longer driven by panic. It is guided by clarity. Life has carried you through every season before this one. It has brought growth from confusion and strength from difficulty. When you trust timing, you stop exhausting yourself against invisible walls. You learn to rest while life rearranges itself quietly in the background. And often, when the mind finally relaxes, what you were waiting for arrives without struggle, not because you chased it harder, but because you were finally ready to receive it. 3. The mind creates problems where reality is still peaceful. Much of what we call worry does not come from life itself, but from the stories the mind creates about life. Buddhism teaches that the mind is a powerful tool, but when it is left unchecked, it becomes a source of unnecessary suffering. The mind is constantly interpreting, predicting, and labeling experiences. It takes a single moment and stretches it into 1,000 imagined outcomes. One small uncertainty becomes a large threat. One unanswered question becomes a crisis. In this way, worry is born not from what is happening, but from what the mind believes might happen. When you pause and observe carefully, you may notice something important. In this very moment, many of the things you worry about are not actually present. You are breathing. You are sitting or standing safely. The problem exists mainly in thought, yet the body reacts as if danger is real. The heart races, the stomach tightens, the breath becomes shallow. Buddhism explains that the mind does not always distinguish between reality and imagination. When fear-based thoughts repeat, the body responds with stress, even when there is no immediate threat. This is how suffering multiplies without reason. The mind has a habit of traveling into the future and bringing fear back into the present. It asks endless questions. What if this goes wrong? What if I fail? What if I lose something important? These questions feel urgent, but they are rarely useful. They do not solve problems. They only steal peace. Buddhism teaches that the present moment is usually far less frightening than the future the mind invents. Reality, when experienced directly, is often neutral or even gentle. It is thought that adds danger where none exists. When you learn to observe the mind instead of obeying it, worry begins to lose its authority. You start to see thoughts as passing events, not commands. You notice that a fearful thought can appear and disappear on its own if you do not cling to it. Buddhism calls this awareness. It is the ability to watch the mind without becoming trapped inside it. In this awareness, you realize that you do not have to solve every imagined problem. You only need to respond to what is real and present. As the mind quiets, something beautiful happens. You begin to experience life more directly. You hear sounds without labeling them as threats. You feel emotions without being consumed by them. You stop rehearsing pain that has not arrived. This does not mean that challenges disappear. It means they are faced one at a time without the added weight of fear. When the mind stops creating unnecessary problems, life feels lighter. Peace becomes available again, not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer fighting illusions. In this stillness, clarity arises naturally, and life unfolds with far less resistance. 4. Letting go is not giving up, it is trusting life more deeply. Many people fear letting go because they confuse it with failure, weakness, or loss. The mind believes that if it releases control, everything will fall apart. Buddhism teaches the opposite. Letting go is not an act of surrender to chaos. It is an act of deep understanding. It is the recognition that forcing life to move according to fear only creates resistance, and resistance is the root of suffering. When you cling tightly to outcomes, you suffer twice. First, you suffer in the present through anxiety. Second, you suffer again when reality does not match your expectations. Letting go ends this unnecessary struggle. To let go does not mean you stop caring or stop making effort. It means you stop demanding that life obey your timeline, your expectations, and your fears. You continue to act with sincerity, discipline, and intention, but you release attachment to how things must turn out. Buddhism calls this wise effort. It is effort without tension. When effort is free from fear, it becomes more effective. Your actions are clearer, your decisions are calmer. You no longer rush or freeze, you respond. The habit of control comes from fear of uncertainty. The mind wants guarantees, but life does not offer them. Buddhism teaches that uncertainty is not a threat. It is the natural condition of existence. When you resist uncertainty, worry grows. When you accept uncertainty, peace grows. Letting go is learning to stand calmly in the unknown without needing immediate answers. It is trusting that clarity will arrive when it is needed, not when fear demands it. When you begin to let go, you may notice discomfort at first. The mind is used to gripping, planning, and worrying. It feels unsafe without these habits, but with patience, a new feeling emerges. Lightness. The body relaxes, the breath deepens, the heart softens. Life feels less like a battle and more like a conversation. You stop pushing against reality and begin listening to it. In this state of trust, life often responds in unexpected ways. Solutions appear that could not be seen before. People cross your path at the right moment. Opportunities unfold naturally, without force. Buddhism does not say that life becomes perfect when you let go. It says life becomes workable. You stop wasting energy resisting what already is, and that energy becomes available for growth, compassion, and clarity. Letting go is also an act of self-respect. It is choosing peace over endless mental struggle. It is understanding that you do not need to control every outcome to be safe. Life has carried you through uncertainty before. It has shaped you through experiences you once feared. Trusting life more deeply does not mean you will never face difficulty again. It means difficulty will no longer control your inner world. In that freedom, you discover a quiet strength that does not rely on certainty, but on presence. And from that presence, life begins to unfold with greater ease and less resistance. 5. What is meant for you cannot pass you by. One of the deepest sources of worry is the fear of loss. Fear that you will miss an opportunity, lose a person, fall behind in life, or make the wrong decision that ruins everything. The mind constantly asks, what if I miss my chance? What if I choose wrong? What if life leaves me behind? Buddhism gently dissolves this fear by reminding us of a powerful truth. Nothing that is truly meant for you can be taken away by delay, confusion, or even mistakes. Life is not as fragile as the worried mind believes. It moves through causes and conditions that are far larger than your momentary fear. When you worry about missing what is meant for you, you assume that life is random and unfair. You assume that one wrong step can destroy everything. Buddhism teaches the opposite. Every experience you have is part of a chain of causes that shape your path. Even what feels like loss often redirects you toward growth. Many things you once wanted deeply would have limited you if they had stayed. Many doors that closed protected you from suffering you could not yet see. Yet worry convinces the mind that every ending is a disaster. In reality, many endings are silent beginnings in disguise. Attachment intensifies worry because it convinces you that happiness exists in one specific form, one person, one outcome, one timeline. When life moves differently, fear arises. Buddhism teaches non-attachment, not as emotional coldness, but as freedom from narrow expectations. When you release the belief that happiness depends on one outcome, the heart becomes flexible. It adapts. It receives what arrives instead of clinging to what leaves. This flexibility is not weakness, it is wisdom. A rigid tree snaps in the storm, a flexible tree bends and survives. When something truly belongs to you, it does not require panic to hold it together. It does not demand constant fear, chasing, or self-betrayal. It aligns naturally with your growth. When something leaves your life despite your effort, it is often because its purpose has been fulfilled. Worrying about what has already departed only chains you to the past. Buddhism teaches that clinging to what is gone creates suffering, while trusting the flow of change creates peace. Life has a way of returning what is aligned, sometimes in unexpected forms. What you lose may return as wisdom. What you fail may return as strength. What you release may return as clarity. When you stop worrying about loss, you begin to notice how life continues to support you in subtle ways. You are guided through experiences that shape patience, compassion, and resilience. None of this is accidental. When you trust that what is meant for you will arrive in its own way, you stop rushing. You stop comparing your journey to others. You stop measuring your worth by what you have or have not achieved yet. You return to the present, where life is actually happening. From this place, decisions become less fearful. You act with sincerity instead of desperation. You allow life to unfold without forcing it to match your expectations. This trust does not mean that everything will always feel comfortable. It means that even discomfort has purpose. Even uncertainty has direction. Buddhism teaches that peace comes not from controlling life, but from understanding its nature. When you realize that nothing meant for you can truly miss you, worry loosens its grip. You move forward with a quieter heart, knowing that life is not trying to deprive you, but to shape you. And in that understanding, everything that truly belongs to you finds its way, quietly and at the right time. 6. Stillness is where life begins to speak to you. One of the most overlooked causes of worry is noise. Not the noise of the world, but the constant noise inside the mind. Thoughts speaking over one another, fears interrupting calm moments, memories dragging the past into the present, and imagined futures demanding attention. Buddhism teaches that when the mind is noisy, life cannot be heard clearly. Worry thrives in this noise because fear needs constant movement to survive. It needs questions, assumptions, and mental urgency. Stillness, on the other hand, dissolves worry because fear cannot breathe in silence. Many people believe that thinking more will solve their problems. They sit with a problem and replay it again and again, hoping clarity will eventually appear through repetition. Buddhism gently corrects this misunderstanding. Clarity does not come from more thinking, it comes from less resistance. When the mind is agitated, it only rearranges fear into different shapes. It cannot see truth clearly. Just as muddy water becomes clear when left undisturbed, the mind becomes clear when it is allowed to rest. Stillness is not emptiness, it is openness. When you slow down and allow stillness, you begin to notice something subtle. Life has always been communicating with you, but worry kept interrupting the message. Through intuition, bodily sensations, quiet realizations, and moments of calm insight, life offers guidance. But these signals are soft. They do not compete with panic. When the mind is rushing, these signals are drowned out. Buddhism emphasizes meditation and mindful awareness not to escape reality, but to hear it more clearly. In stillness, you begin to distinguish between what truly requires action and what only demands attention because of fear. Many worries lose their urgency when seen clearly. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. Some problems dissolve entirely when the mind stops feeding them. Stillness allows you to respond instead of react. Reaction is fueled by fear. Response is guided by awareness. This difference changes everything. Stillness also reconnects you with your body. Worry pulls attention into the future, away from the present moment. The body, however, always lives in the now. When you return to stillness, you notice your breath, your posture, the sensation of being alive. The nervous system begins to settle, the heart slows, the body understands safety before the mind does. Buddhism recognizes the body as a gateway to peace. When the body relaxes, the mind follows. Many answers you seek do not arrive as words. They arrive as feelings of certainty, ease, or quiet knowing. Stillness allows these answers to surface naturally. You may suddenly feel that something is not meant for you anymore, or that it is time to move forward, or that patience is required. These insights are not forced. They arise when the mind stops interfering. Buddhism calls this wisdom arising from awareness, not effort. Stillness also teaches acceptance. When you sit quietly with discomfort instead of escaping it, you discover that fear is not as dangerous as it claims. Worry exaggerates pain. Stillness reveals its true size. You realize that you can remain present even when answers are unclear. This builds inner stability. You stop depending on certainty to feel safe. You learn to trust yourself within uncertainty. In a worried mind, silence feels threatening. In an aware mind, silence feels like home. As you become familiar with stillness, you begin to carry it into daily life. You pause before reacting. You listen more deeply. You act with intention instead of panic. Even when challenges arise, you are not immediately pulled into fear. You create space between experience and response. This space is freedom. Life does not demand constant effort from you. It responds to presence. When you are still, you align with the natural rhythm of existence. Decisions become clearer because they are no longer driven by fear. Relationships feel lighter because you stop projecting anxiety onto others. Worry fades not because life becomes predictable, but because you become grounded. Buddhism teaches that peace is not something you create. It is something you uncover by removing what disturbs it. Stillness removes disturbance. It reveals that beneath worry, beneath fear, beneath endless thinking, there has always been a quiet awareness capable of holding whatever arises. When you rest in this awareness, life no longer feels hostile. It feels communicative, supportive, intelligent. In stillness, you realize that you were never meant to carry everything alone. Life is not waiting for you to figure it out through worry. It is waiting for you to listen. When you do, guidance arrives naturally. Timing becomes clearer, trust deepens, and slowly, without force, worry loosens its grip. In that quiet space, you discover that life has been guiding you all along, patiently, gently, and at exactly the pace you needed. 7. Peace is the sign that everything is quietly aligning. Many people believe that peace will come only after everything is solved, after the answers arrive, after certainty is guaranteed, after life finally behaves the way they want it to. Buddhism gently turns this belief upside down. Peace is not the reward at the end of control. Peace is the signal that you have stopped fighting reality. It is the quiet confirmation that you are aligned with life as it is, not as fear demands it to be. When peace begins to appear in your heart, even while questions remain unanswered, it means something important is happening beneath the surface. Worry convinces the mind that tension is necessary for survival. It whispers that if you relax, you will miss something, lose something, or fail to protect yourself. Buddhism teaches that this constant alertness is not awareness, it is exhaustion. True awareness is calm, open, and present. When you stop worrying, you do not become careless, you become clear. Peace does not mean nothing will ever go wrong again. It means you are no longer at war with uncertainty. You understand that uncertainty is not an enemy, it is the natural condition of life. When peace arises, it often feels unfamiliar at first. The mind may even resist it. Years of worry train the nervous system to believe tension is normal. Calm can feel strange, even unsafe. But Buddhism teaches that peace is your original state. It is what remains when unnecessary mental activity settles. As you allow this peace to exist without questioning it, something profound happens. Your perception of life changes. Situations that once felt threatening begin to feel workable. Problems lose their emotional charge. You no longer react immediately. You pause. You breathe. You respond. Peace also changes how you relate to time. Worry pulls you into imagined futures and unresolved pasts. Peace anchors you in the present. From this grounded place, you realize that most of your life has always been lived one moment at a time. The future has never arrived all at once, and the past no longer exists, except as memory. When you stop trying to live everywhere at once, your energy returns to where life is actually happening. This return to the present is not small, it is transformative. Buddhism teaches that peace is not dependent on circumstances. If it were, it would be fragile and temporary. True peace arises from understanding impermanence. You begin to see that everything changes, including fear, confusion, and difficulty. When you stop resisting change, you stop fearing it. You no longer demand permanence from what is temporary. This understanding softens the heart. You stop gripping tightly. You allow life to move through you without constant resistance. As peace deepens, trust naturally follows. You begin to trust not because you know what will happen, but because you know you can meet whatever happens. This trust is not blind optimism. It is grounded confidence. It is the knowledge that you have survived uncertainty before, that you have adapted, that you have grown. When worry dissolves, you see your own resilience more clearly. You stop doubting your ability to handle life. Peace also reshapes your relationships. When worry governs the mind, you project fear onto others. You expect reassurance, you cling, you react emotionally. When peace is present, you meet others with openness. You listen more deeply. You release the need to control how others behave or feel. This creates healthier connections. You allow people to be who they are, just as you allow yourself to be human and imperfect. Compassion grows naturally when fear recedes. There is a quiet intelligence moving through life that does not announce itself loudly. Buddhism points to this intelligence again and again. It is the same intelligence that guides seasons, growth, healing, and transformation. When you stop worrying, you begin to sense this intelligence at work in your own life. Things align subtly. Conversations happen at the right time. Insights arrive when you are ready. Not because you forced them, but because you made space for them. Peace does not mean life becomes effortless. It means effort becomes purposeful instead of frantic. You act when action is needed and rest when rest is needed. You stop mistaking busyness for progress. You understand that silence is not emptiness. It is preparation. In peace, you no longer measure your worth by productivity, speed, or comparison. You measure it by presence and sincerity. The worried mind believes that everything must be controlled for life to work out. The peaceful mind understands that life works out because it is allowed to unfold. This understanding does not come overnight. It grows gradually as you practice letting go, staying present, and trusting timing. Each moment of peace reinforces this truth. Each moment without worry strengthens your connection to life. In Buddhism, enlightenment is not a dramatic event. It is a deep simplicity. It is seeing things as they are without adding fear. Peace is not something you achieve by becoming someone else. It is something you remember by releasing what you are not. When you stop worrying, you stop carrying a version of yourself that was built around fear. What remains is quieter, steadier, and more grounded. As this peace settles, you begin to notice something deeply reassuring. Life has always been moving toward balance. Even your struggles were shaping you. Even your confusion was guiding you. Nothing was wasted, nothing was random. When you understand this, regret softens. Anxiety loosens. You forgive yourself for not knowing sooner. You realize that you arrived here exactly as you needed to. This is why Buddhism teaches trust so gently. Not as a command, but as an invitation. Trust life a little more. Trust yourself a little more. Stop worrying not because everything is perfect, but because everything is moving, quietly, patiently, intelligently. Peace is the sign that alignment is happening. And when alignment happens, things fall into place not with noise or force, but with a calm certainty that feels like coming home. 8. When you stop worrying, you finally meet life as it is. There is a subtle but profound shift that happens when worry loosens its grip on the mind. It is not dramatic. It does not arrive with fireworks or sudden certainty. It arrives quietly, almost unnoticed at first. Buddhism teaches that suffering often comes not from life itself, but from our refusal to see life as it truly is. Worry is the mind's way of arguing with reality. It insists that things should be different, faster, clearer, or safer than they are. When you stop worrying, you stop arguing. And in that silence, life finally reveals itself honestly. Most people have never truly met life as it is. They meet life through fear, expectations, and endless mental commentary. They experience the present moment filtered through past disappointments and future anxieties. Buddhism invites you to step out of this mental fog and experience reality directly. When worry fades, you begin to see clearly. You notice that life is not constantly attacking you. Much of the time, it is simply unfolding. The danger was not always in the situation. It was in the story you told yourself about it. When the mind is worried, it divides life into threats and guarantees. It labels experiences as good or bad before fully understanding them. This labeling creates tension. Buddhism teaches that reality itself is neutral. Pain and pleasure arise, but suffering is added through resistance. When you stop worrying, you stop resisting the unknown. You allow experiences to come and go without immediately judging them. This does not make you passive, it makes you present. Presence is where wisdom lives. In this presence, you begin to realize how much energy was wasted on imagined futures. You see how often you carried burdens that were never yours to carry. Worry convinced you that you had to mentally solve life in advance. But life was never asking for that. It was asking you to show up fully, moment by moment. When you stop worrying, your attention returns to what is real. You eat when you eat. You walk when you walk. You listen when you listen. This simplicity feels unfamiliar at first, but it is deeply healing. Buddhism teaches mindfulness not as a technique, but as a way of living honestly. When you are mindful, you are not escaping life. You are entering it fully. Worry pulls you away from this honesty. It makes you half-present, divided between now and imagined tomorrows. When worry dissolves, you become whole again. You stop living in fragments. This wholeness is not perfection. It is integrity. You are finally where you are. As you meet life directly, fear begins to lose its authority. Fear thrives on imagination. It weakens when faced with reality. Many situations you once feared become manageable when experienced one step at a time. Buddhism teaches that suffering multiplies when we anticipate pain. When you stop anticipating, you face only what is here. And what is here is often far less overwhelming than what the mind predicted. Meeting life as it is also deepens compassion. When worry ruled the mind, you were constantly protecting yourself, bracing for impact. In this state, it is hard to see others clearly. When worry fades, the heart opens. You recognize that others are also struggling with uncertainty. This recognition softens judgment. You become kinder, not because you force compassion, but because fear is no longer blocking it. Buddhism teaches that compassion arises naturally when the mind is not consumed by self-protection. This meeting with life also changes how you relate to pain. Pain no longer feels like a personal failure or a sign that something has gone wrong. It becomes part of the human experience. Buddhism does not deny pain. It denies the need to panic about pain. When worry disappears, pain becomes something you can sit with, learn from, and eventually release. You stop turning discomfort into catastrophe. Another quiet transformation occurs when you stop worrying. You begin to trust your experience. You no longer feel the need to constantly seek reassurance, approval, or certainty from outside yourself. You develop inner stability. This stability does not mean you always feel confident. It means you feel grounded. You know that even when answers are unclear, you can remain present and respond wisely. This trust in your own awareness is deeply liberating. Life also begins to feel slower, not because time changes, but because your mind is no longer rushing ahead of reality. When worry dominated, everything felt urgent. Every decision felt heavy. Without worry, time feels spacious. You move at a human pace instead of a fearful one. Buddhism teaches that rushing is a form of violence against the present moment. When you stop worrying, you stop rushing. You allow life to unfold at its natural speed. In this slower rhythm, meaning begins to emerge. You notice small moments of beauty that were previously overlooked. A quiet morning, a deep breath, a moment of connection. Worry blinded you to these experiences because it was always searching for the next problem. When the search ends, appreciation begins. Gratitude arises naturally, not as a practice, but as a response to seeing clearly. Meeting life as it is also frees you from comparison. Worry often feeds on the illusion that others are ahead, safer, or more successful. When you stop worrying, you stop measuring your life against imaginary standards. You see your path as it is, unique and unfolding, according to its own conditions. Buddhism teaches that comparison is a thief of peace because it ignores the complexity of individual journeys. When you stop comparing, you return to your own life with respect. Eventually, you begin to understand something very simple and very deep. Life was never asking you to worry so much. It was asking you to participate, to feel, to respond, to learn, to grow. Worry was not devotion, it was fear pretending to be responsibility. When you release it, you discover that you are still caring, still engaged, still thoughtful, but without the constant weight of anxiety. This is not a final destination. Buddhism does not promise permanent calm. Thoughts will return. Worries may arise again. But now you recognize them. You do not mistake them for truth. You do not build your life around them. You let them pass. Each time you do, trust deepens. Each time you return to presence, peace strengthens. When you stop worrying, you do not become someone else. You become more yourself, less defended, less fragmented, more alive. You meet life not as an enemy to conquer, but as a teacher to listen to. And in this meeting, quietly and without force, everything begins to make sense, not because all answers are revealed, but because you are finally at peace with not knowing. 9. When you trust life, you stop fighting yourself. One of the most hidden costs of worry is not how it affects your future, but how it turns you against yourself in the present. Buddhism teaches that inner conflict is one of the deepest forms of suffering. When you worry constantly, you are not only questioning life, you are questioning yourself. You doubt your choices, your pace, your worth, and your ability to handle what comes next. The mind becomes divided. One part of you wants to move forward, another part fears every step. This inner division drains your energy and creates exhaustion that no amount of rest can fix. Worry convinces you that something is wrong with you for not having everything figured out. It whispers that you should be stronger, faster, calmer, more certain. Buddhism gently dissolves this illusion by reminding you that being human means living within uncertainty. Not knowing is not failure, it is reality. When you trust life, you stop demanding perfection from yourself. You stop treating uncertainty as a personal flaw. This shift alone releases a tremendous amount of inner pressure. Fighting life always turns into fighting yourself because you are not separate from life. When you resist change, you resist your own growth. When you fear uncertainty, you fear your own becoming. Buddhism teaches that you are not meant to remain fixed. You are meant to change, adapt, and evolve. Worry tries to freeze you in place. Trust allows movement. When you trust life, you allow yourself to grow without punishment. Many people carry guilt for feeling tired, confused, or unmotivated. They believe worry is proof of care, responsibility, or seriousness. Buddhism teaches that constant tension is not devotion. It is misunderstanding. Care can exist without fear. Responsibility can exist without anxiety. When you trust life, you still take action, but you no longer whip yourself with mental pressure. You act from clarity instead of self-attack. Trusting life also heals your relationship with effort. Worry turns effort into struggle. Every action feels heavy because it is loaded with fear of failure. Buddhism introduces the idea of right effort, effort that is balanced, patient, and free from desperation. When you trust life, effort becomes lighter. You do what you can today without demanding that it solve everything forever. This makes progress sustainable. You stop burning yourself out trying to control outcomes. As trust deepens, you begin to notice how often worry made you abandon the present moment. You were physically here, but mentally somewhere else, bracing for impact, preparing defenses, imagining loss. When trust replaces worry, you return to yourself. You inhabit your body again. You feel grounded instead of scattered. Buddhism teaches that embodiment is essential for peace. When you live only in the mind, fear multiplies. When you return to the body and breath, stability returns. Trust also softens your inner dialogue. The harsh voice that criticizes every mistake begins to lose its authority. You become kinder toward yourself, not out of indulgence, but out of understanding. You recognize that learning requires error, growth requires time. Buddhism teaches compassion not only toward others, but toward your own imperfection. When you trust life, you trust that you are allowed to be unfinished. Another quiet transformation occurs when you stop fighting yourself. You stop comparing your inner world to others' outer appearances. Worry feeds comparison. It tells you that others are ahead, safer, or more successful. Trust dissolves this illusion. You understand that every person carries unseen struggles. Buddhism teaches that comparison ignores the complexity of karma, history, and circumstance. When you stop comparing, you reclaim your path with dignity. Trusting life also changes how you respond to setbacks. When worry dominates, setbacks feel like proof that you are failing. When trust is present, setbacks become information. They guide adjustment, not self-blame. Buddhism teaches that wisdom grows through experience, not avoidance. When you trust life, you do not collapse when things go wrong. You observe, learn, and continue. This trust does not eliminate pain, but it changes your relationship with pain. Pain no longer feels like betrayal. It feels like part of the human experience. You stop asking why this is happening to you and start asking what this moment is teaching you. This shift transforms suffering into insight. Buddhism does not promise comfort at all times. It promises understanding. Understanding reduces suffering far more effectively than control ever could. As inner conflict fades, you experience a sense of wholeness. You are no longer split between who you are and who you think you should be. You allow yourself to exist without constant correction. This does not make you complacent. It makes you honest. From honesty, genuine change becomes possible. You no longer change out of fear. You change out of clarity. Trusting life also restores joy in simple things. Worry numbs joy because the mind is always elsewhere. When you stop worrying, moments regain color. A quiet walk, a deep breath, a shared smile. Buddhism teaches that joy is not something you chase. It is something that appears when resistance fades. Trust creates the conditions for joy to arise naturally. Eventually, you realize that much of your struggle was not with life, but with your own thoughts about life. You were trying to protect yourself from uncertainty by tightening your grip, but life responds better to openness than control. When you trust life, you relax into participation instead of opposition. You work with change instead of against it. This trust is not blind faith. It is lived experience. Each time you survive uncertainty, each time you adapt, each time you learn from difficulty, trust grows. You stop needing guarantees to move forward. You stop waiting for perfect clarity. You move with what you know now, trusting that understanding will deepen as you go. In Buddhism, liberation is not escape from life. It is freedom within life. When you stop worrying, you stop imprisoning yourself with fear. When you trust life, you stop fighting yourself. What remains is a quieter strength, a steady presence, and a deep acceptance of being human. From this place, life no longer feels like something to survive. It feels like something to live. 10. Freedom begins the moment you stop arguing with life. At the deepest level, worry is not about the future, it is about resistance. It is the quiet argument you carry inside yourself against how life is unfolding. Buddhism teaches that suffering does not come from pain alone, but from the refusal to accept reality as it is in this moment. When you worry, you are saying, "This should not be happening," or "This should already be resolved," or "I cannot accept this uncertainty." These thoughts feel protective, but they imprison you. Freedom begins the moment you stop arguing with life and start listening to it instead. Most people believe they will be free once circumstances improve. Once answers arrive, once safety is guaranteed. Buddhism reveals a different truth. Freedom is not postponed until life becomes predictable. Freedom is available now, the moment resistance ends. This does not mean you like everything that happens. It means you stop fighting the fact that it is happening. When you accept reality, you conserve energy. When you resist reality, you exhaust yourself. Worry is exhaustion disguised as preparation. Arguing with life turns the mind into a battlefield. One part of you wants peace, another part demands certainty, one part wants to rest, another insists on vigilance. Buddhism teaches that inner peace cannot exist where there is inner war. The mind cannot relax while it believes it must constantly defend itself against the unknown. When you stop arguing, the battlefield dissolves. What remains is awareness, steady and capable. Acceptance is often misunderstood as weakness. In truth, it is strength without aggression. It is clarity without force. When you accept life, you are not surrendering your agency. You are choosing not to waste it on resistance. You redirect your energy toward what can actually be done. You respond instead of react. This response is grounded, measured, and effective because it is not driven by fear. Worry demands guarantees before action. Acceptance allows action without guarantees. This difference changes everything. When you stop waiting for certainty, life opens. You move forward with partial information, guided by values instead of fear. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is not knowing everything in advance. It is knowing how to meet each moment with awareness. When you accept uncertainty, you become flexible. When you resist it, you become rigid and fragile. As resistance fades, the mind becomes quieter, not empty, but spacious. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer dominate. You see them as weather passing through awareness. This distance creates freedom. You are no longer trapped inside every worry. You can choose which thoughts deserve attention. Buddhism calls this right view, seeing clearly without distortion. In this clarity, you begin to trust yourself, not because you are certain of outcomes, but because you are certain of your presence. You know you can meet whatever arises. This confidence is calm, not loud. It does not need reassurance. It grows from lived experience. Each time you face uncertainty without panic, trust strengthens. Each time you accept what is, freedom expands. Freedom also changes how you experience effort. You stop forcing yourself through life. You stop using fear as fuel. You act because action is needed, not because anxiety demands it. Buddhism teaches that effort guided by fear is unsustainable. It burns the mind and hardens the heart. Effort guided by awareness is balanced. It allows rest without guilt and action without desperation. As you stop arguing with life, relationships soften. You stop needing others to behave in specific ways to feel okay. You allow people to be human. You release expectations that once fueled disappointment. This does not mean you accept harm. It means you stop attaching your peace to others' actions. Buddhism teaches that attachment to expectations is a major source of suffering. Letting go of these expectations restores emotional freedom. You also stop arguing with yourself. The inner critic loses power. You no longer punish yourself for not being perfect, fast enough, or certain enough. You recognize that growth unfolds through experience, not judgment. This self-acceptance is not complacency, it is compassion. Compassion allows learning, self-attack blocks it. Freedom reveals a simple truth. Life was never asking you to control it. It was asking you to participate honestly, to show up fully, to respond wisely, to rest when needed. Worry distracted you from this participation by keeping your attention trapped in imagined futures. When you stop worrying, your attention returns to the present, where life is actually happening. In Buddhism, liberation is not escape from responsibility. It is release from unnecessary suffering. You still experience joy and pain, gain and loss, success and failure. But these experiences no longer define you. They move through awareness instead of owning it. This is inner freedom. It does not depend on conditions. It depends on understanding. Eventually, you see that nothing was truly wrong with you for worrying. You were simply trying to protect yourself with the tools you had. Now you have better tools: awareness, acceptance, trust. These do not eliminate difficulty, but they eliminate the added suffering created by resistance. This is the heart of Buddhist wisdom. When you stop arguing with life, you stop living as if you are under constant threat. You relax into being alive. You stop bracing and start breathing. You meet uncertainty with curiosity instead of fear. You meet challenges with steadiness instead of panic. You meet yourself with kindness instead of judgment. This is not the end of worry forever. Thoughts will return. Fear may arise again. But now you recognize them. You do not follow them blindly. You return to acceptance again and again. Each return strengthens freedom. Each moment of acceptance deepens peace. Freedom begins quietly, not with answers, but with openness, not with control, but with trust, not with force, but with understanding. When you stop arguing with life, you discover that life was never your enemy, it was your teacher. And in listening instead of resisting, you finally step into the freedom that was always available to you. 11. When you accept impermanence, worry loses its power completely. At the deepest level of Buddhist wisdom lies a truth that quietly dissolves worry at its root. Everything changes. Nothing stays the same. This is not a threat. It is the nature of existence. Worry survives only because the mind secretly believes that things should remain stable, predictable, and permanent. When reality does not meet this expectation, fear arises. Buddhism teaches that impermanence is not something to fear. It is something to understand. When impermanence is fully accepted, worry no longer has a place to stand. Much of your anxiety comes from trying to hold on to moments, people, roles, and identities as if they could last forever. You worry about losing what you love. You worry about becoming someone you do not recognize. You worry about the future because you want certainty in a world that does not offer it. Buddhism does not promise certainty. It offers clarity. Everything that arises will pass. This includes pain. This includes confusion. This includes fear itself. When you truly understand this, worry begins to soften because you stop treating temporary experiences as permanent threats. The mind resists impermanence because it equates change with danger. It believes that if something ends, something has gone wrong. Buddhism gently corrects this misunderstanding. Change is not failure. Change is movement. Growth cannot exist without it. Every transformation in your life was made possible by something ending. Childhood ended, so adulthood could begin. Old beliefs ended, so new understanding could form. Even suffering often ends, so wisdom can emerge. When you accept impermanence, you stop interpreting endings as personal losses and begin to see them as natural transitions. Worry keeps you trapped between past and future. It pulls you backward with regret and forward with fear. Impermanence brings you back to the present. When you realize that this moment will also pass, you stop clinging to it anxiously. You experience it fully instead. Buddhism teaches that presence is born from impermanence. Because nothing lasts, this moment becomes precious. You stop postponing life until conditions improve. You live now. Accepting impermanence also heals attachment. Attachment does not mean love, it means fear of loss. When you love while accepting impermanence, love becomes lighter and more genuine. You stop trying to possess people or moments. You appreciate them while they are here. This appreciation deepens connection rather than weakening it. Buddhism teaches that non-attachment does not reduce love. It purifies it. Love free from fear is calmer, kinder, and more spacious. When impermanence is understood, worry about the future begins to dissolve. You realize that no future moment can be permanently secured. Even the most perfect outcome will change. This realization is not depressing, it is liberating. You stop exhausting yourself trying to lock life into place. You stop living as if one mistake will ruin everything forever. You understand that life is a continuous unfolding, not a single decisive event. Impermanence also softens your relationship with identity. Worry often comes from fear of becoming someone you do not want to be. Buddhism teaches that the self is not fixed. You are not a finished product. You are a process. This understanding frees you from harsh self-judgment. You stop demanding that you be consistent, certain, or complete. You allow yourself to grow naturally. Each version of you had a purpose. None were mistakes. As this understanding deepens, you begin to trust life more naturally. You no longer need guarantees because you no longer believe that permanence is required for safety. You understand that adaptability is strength. Resilience comes from flexibility, not control. When something changes, you adjust. When something ends, you grieve, learn, and continue. This trust is quiet and steady. It does not rely on optimism, it relies on understanding. Impermanence also transforms how you experience pain. Pain no longer feels endless. Even intense emotions lose their threat when you remember that they will change. Buddhism teaches that suffering intensifies when we believe it will never end. When you know that pain is temporary, you can stay present with it without panic. This presence allows healing to occur naturally. You stop fighting pain and start listening to what it reveals. In daily life, accepting impermanence brings humility and peace. You stop expecting life to conform to your plans. You stop being shocked when things change. You move with reality instead of against it. This movement feels like relief. The mind no longer has to be on constant alert. Worry fades because there is nothing left to defend against. Change is expected. Flow becomes natural. Eventually, you realize that impermanence is not something happening to you. It is something happening through you. You are part of the same flow as everything else. Seasons change, bodies change. Thoughts change, you change. When you stop resisting this truth, you stop feeling isolated. You feel connected to life rather than threatened by it. This connection is deeply comforting. Buddhism teaches that awakening is not about escaping impermanence. It is about embracing it fully. When you do, worry loses its foundation. Fear no longer dominates because there is no false expectation of permanence to protect. You live more gently, you let go more easily, you forgive more readily, you appreciate more deeply. At this stage, worry does not disappear because you forced it away. It disappears because it no longer makes sense. You see clearly that life does not need to be held tightly to be meaningful. In fact, it becomes meaningful because it is fleeting. Each breath matters because it passes. Each moment matters because it cannot be repeated. When you accept impermanence fully, You stop living in fear of change and start living in harmony with it. This harmony is peace. Not a peace that depends on things staying the same, but a peace that flows through change itself. This is the peace Buddhism points to again and again: quiet, grounded, unshakable. And in this understanding, worry finally loosens its grip completely, not because life has become predictable, but because you have learned to move with life exactly as it is. 12. When you fully return to the present, worry has nowhere to live. At the very heart of Buddhist wisdom is a simple but life-changing realization. Worry can only exist when the mind leaves the present moment. It survives in imagined futures and unresolved pasts, but it cannot live where awareness is fully here. When you return completely to the present, not briefly, not partially, but wholeheartedly, worry loses its ground. It has nowhere to attach itself. Buddhism does not teach this as a philosophy to believe in, but as an experience to live. Most of your life has been spent mentally elsewhere. You are eating, but thinking about tomorrow. You are resting, but replaying yesterday. You are breathing, but anticipating what might go wrong next. The body remains in the present, but the mind wanders endlessly. Buddhism teaches that this separation is the root of suffering. When mind and body are not together, peace cannot settle. Worry fills the gap created by absence. Returning to the present does not mean forcing your thoughts to stop. It means gently bringing attention back again and again to what is real right now: the sensation of breathing, the weight of the body, the simple fact of being alive. When awareness rests here, something remarkable happens. The nervous system calms, the heart softens. The urgency that fueled worry begins to dissolve. Nothing dramatic changes externally, yet internally, everything shifts. Worry thrives on the illusion that the present moment is incomplete. It convinces you that something crucial is missing and must be mentally secured before peace is allowed. Buddhism teaches that the present moment is always whole. Even discomfort does not make it incomplete. Pain may be present, uncertainty may be present, but life itself is fully here. When you accept this, you stop postponing peace until conditions improve. You realize peace is not something you add to life. It is something you notice when you stop leaving it. When you fully return to the present, you also stop carrying unnecessary mental weight. You are no longer trying to solve your entire life at once. You meet only what is in front of you: this moment, this breath, this step. Buddhism teaches that life was never meant to be lived all at once. It unfolds moment by moment. Worry collapses time into one overwhelming burden. Presence restores time to its natural rhythm. Being present also transforms your relationship with fear. Fear loses its intensity when it is observed rather than followed. When you stay present, you notice fear as a sensation, not a prophecy. You feel it in the body without turning it into a story. Buddhism teaches that emotions are visitors. They arrive, stay briefly, and leave. When you do not chase them into thought, they pass naturally. Worry disappears not because fear never arises, but because it is no longer fed. Returning to the present also reconnects you with trust. Trust is not a belief about the future. It is a felt sense of safety in the now. When you are fully present, you realize that in this moment you are surviving, you are breathing, you are capable. This realization builds quiet confidence. You stop fearing the unknown because you trust your ability to meet it when it arrives. Buddhism teaches that confidence grows from awareness, not prediction. As presence deepens, your actions become simpler and more effective. You listen fully, you respond clearly, you stop reacting from imagined threats. This clarity makes life feel less chaotic. Problems no longer multiply unnecessarily. Many dissolve on their own when the mind stops interfering. You begin to see that much of what you worried about never required your suffering to resolve. Returning to the present also restores gratitude. When the mind is busy worrying, it overlooks what is already supporting you. Presence reveals the quiet gifts that were always there: a stable breath, a moment of stillness, a sense of being held by life. Buddhism teaches that gratitude is not something you practice. It is something that arises naturally when the mind stops running ahead. Presence also softens your relationship with yourself. When you are fully here, you stop judging your entire life from one moment of uncertainty. You stop labeling yourself as failing or behind. You see yourself simply as human, doing your best in this moment. This self-compassion is not weakness, it is clarity. From compassion, growth becomes possible without fear. Eventually, returning to the present becomes less of an effort and more of a homecoming. You recognize the feeling of being here. You notice when the mind drifts into worry and gently guide it back. This is not control, it is care. Buddhism teaches mindfulness not as discipline, but as kindness toward the mind. At this stage, worry no longer dominates your life. It may still appear, but it no longer defines you. You recognize it as a habit, not a necessity. Each time you return to the present, worry loses strength. Each time you stay with what is, peace deepens. The present moment does not promise perfection, it offers truth. And truth is enough. When you stop abandoning the present, you stop abandoning yourself. You stop searching for safety in imagined futures. You find it in awareness itself. This is the quiet conclusion Buddhism points toward. You were never meant to carry the weight of tomorrow today. You were meant to live now. When you return fully to the present, worry fades naturally, not because life is controlled, but because life is finally being lived. 13. When peace becomes natural, life no longer feels like a problem to solve. At a certain point on the inner path, something subtle but profound changes. Peace stops feeling like something you must chase, protect, or maintain. It becomes your natural background state. Buddhism teaches that peace is not an achievement. It is what remains when unnecessary struggle falls away. Worry once made life feel like a puzzle you had to solve urgently, as if one wrong move would ruin everything. When peace becomes natural, life no longer feels like a problem. It feels like a process. Most worry comes from the belief that life must be figured out completely in order to be lived correctly. The mind demands answers before allowing rest. It believes peace should come after certainty. Buddhism reveals that this belief keeps peace permanently out of reach. Life is not meant to be solved like a riddle. It is meant to be experienced moment by moment. When you stop treating life as a problem, the constant mental pressure dissolves. When peace becomes natural, your relationship with uncertainty changes completely. Uncertainty no longer feels like danger. It feels like openness. Buddhism teaches that uncertainty is the space where growth happens. If everything were already known, nothing new could arise. When worry ruled the mind, uncertainty felt unbearable. Now it feels workable. You do not rush to fill it with fear. You allow it to exist without panic. This allowance is freedom. Natural peace also changes how you experience thought. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer command immediate belief. You see them as passing mental events, not urgent instructions. Worry once used thought to trap you in endless loops. Now thought becomes a tool instead of a tyrant. You think when thinking is useful and rest when it is not. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is knowing when to engage the mind and when to let it be. As peace settles, emotional reactions soften. You still feel sadness, joy, disappointment, and hope, but these emotions move through you without taking control. You no longer cling to pleasant emotions or fear unpleasant ones. You allow them to come and go. This emotional fluidity is a sign of maturity, not detachment. Buddhism does not aim to numb the heart. It aims to free it from unnecessary suffering. When peace is natural, your sense of self becomes less rigid. You no longer define yourself by one role, one identity, or one phase of life. You see yourself as a living process rather than a fixed label. This reduces worry because you stop fearing that one mistake will define you forever. Buddhism teaches that identity is not a solid object. It is a collection of changing experiences. Understanding this brings great relief. Natural peace also brings patience. Not forced patience, but organic patience. You stop rushing outcomes because you no longer believe your worth depends on speed. You allow things to ripen in their own time. This patience does not slow your life down. It makes your actions more precise. You move when movement is needed and wait when waiting is wise. Worry once pushed you into premature action. Peace allows intelligent timing. Your relationship with effort transforms as well. You still work, plan, and commit, but without self-violence. You no longer drive yourself through fear. Buddhism teaches that effort rooted in fear is unstable. Effort rooted in clarity is sustainable. When peace is natural, you take care of your energy. You know when to push gently and when to rest deeply. This balance prevents burnout and resentment. As peace deepens, compassion becomes effortless. When worry dominated, much of your energy was spent protecting yourself. Now that protection is no longer needed, the heart opens naturally. You see others more clearly. You recognize fear and confusion in them without judgment. Buddhism teaches that compassion arises when the illusion of separation softens. When you are no longer at war with yourself, you stop being at war with others. Natural peace also changes how you relate to success and failure. These experiences no longer determine your inner stability. You appreciate success without clinging to it. You learn from failure without collapsing into shame. Buddhism teaches that clinging to outcomes creates suffering. When peace is stable, outcomes become teachers rather than verdicts. Life begins to feel simpler, not because it has fewer challenges, but because you are no longer adding unnecessary resistance. You stop overthinking conversations. You stop replaying mistakes endlessly. You stop fearing every unknown. This simplicity does not make life boring. It makes it vivid. You experience moments more fully because you are not constantly distracted by worry. At this stage, peace does not require constant effort. It requires honesty. When fear arises, you acknowledge it without dramatizing it. When confusion appears, you allow it without demanding immediate clarity. Buddhism teaches that truth does not need decoration. When you meet experience honestly, peace remains intact. Eventually, you realize something deeply reassuring. You were never broken for worrying. You were simply operating under misunderstanding. Now that understanding has shifted, peace feels natural. You no longer need to remind yourself to trust life. Trust arises automatically because you have seen how life unfolds when not resisted. This does not mean life becomes perfect. It means life becomes livable. You stop treating existence as a constant emergency. You stop living as if peace is fragile. You understand that peace is resilient because it does not depend on circumstances. When peace becomes natural, you move through life with quiet confidence. You do not need to announce it. You do not need to prove it. You simply live from it. Others may feel calmer around you without knowing why. Your presence becomes steady, grounded, and open. Buddhism describes this state not as an ending, but as a beginning where life is no longer something you endure. It is something you participate in fully. Worry no longer drives your decisions. Fear no longer defines your pace. Peace is no longer a goal, it is the ground you stand on. And from this ground, life continues to unfold, not as a problem to solve, but as a living experience to meet with clarity, patience, and quiet trust. 14. When trust becomes your nature, life stops feeling heavy. At a certain depth of understanding, trust no longer feels like something you practice intentionally. It becomes something you live. Buddhism teaches that true trust is not blind belief in a positive outcome. It is a deep acceptance of reality as it unfolds, combined with confidence in your ability to meet it. When trust becomes your nature, life stops feeling like a burden you must carry alone. The constant heaviness created by worry, tension, and mental anticipation begins to dissolve, not because life has become easier, but because you are no longer resisting it from within. Much of the weight you have felt throughout your life was never caused by events themselves. It was created by inner resistance. The mind constantly judged what was happening, labeled it as wrong or threatening, and tried to force a different outcome. This inner struggle consumed energy. Buddhism teaches that pain is part of life, but suffering is created by resistance to pain. When trust becomes natural, resistance softens. You stop asking life to be different in order for you to feel okay. You meet life as it is, with steadiness. Trust as a lived state changes how you experience uncertainty. Uncertainty no longer feels like a hole you are about to fall into. It feels like open space. Buddhism teaches that openness is not emptiness. It is possibility. When you stop filling uncertainty with fear, you discover that it can hold creativity, insight, and growth. Worry once rushed to close every open space with imagined danger. Trust allows space to exist without panic. This space is where life reorganizes itself naturally. As trust deepens, your relationship with time changes. You stop racing ahead mentally. You stop measuring your worth by how fast things are progressing. Buddhism teaches that impatience often comes from fear of being left behind. When trust is embodied, you no longer fear missing out on life. You understand that your life is unfolding at the only pace it can. This understanding removes pressure. You stop forcing yourself forward and begin to move with life instead of against it. Trust also transforms how you relate to effort. When worry dominated, effort felt tense and exhausting. Every action carried the fear of failure. Buddhism introduces the idea of effort without attachment. When trust becomes your nature, effort becomes gentle and precise. You do what needs to be done without demanding that it solve everything forever. You take the next step without dragging the entire future behind you. This kind of effort is sustainable because it is not fueled by anxiety. As the body relaxes into trust, the nervous system begins to reset. Chronic tension releases gradually, breathing deepens, sleep improves. The body no longer feels like it must remain on constant alert. Buddhism recognizes that the body holds the imprint of fear long after the mind changes. When trust is lived consistently, the body learns safety again. This embodied calm is not fragile. It remains even when challenges arise. Trust as a natural state also changes your emotional landscape. Emotions are no longer treated as emergencies. Sadness, frustration, and disappointment are allowed to arise without being exaggerated by fear. Buddhism teaches that emotions become overwhelming only when resisted. When trust is present, emotions move through you more freely. You feel deeply without being consumed. This emotional freedom is not numbness. It is balance. Your sense of identity also softens as trust grows. You stop defining yourself by outcomes, roles, or temporary states. You recognize yourself as awareness moving through experience. This recognition reduces worry because you no longer believe that a single event can define you forever. Buddhism teaches that clinging to identity creates suffering. When identity loosens, peace expands. Trust also reshapes your relationships. When worry ruled, you may have sought reassurance, control, or predictability from others. When trust becomes your nature, you allow people to be who they are. You stop trying to manage their emotions or behaviors to protect yourself. This does not mean you tolerate harm. It means your peace no longer depends on others meeting your expectations. Relationships become more honest and less heavy. As trust deepens, you begin to notice a quiet cooperation with life. Things do not always go as planned, but they often unfold in meaningful ways. You see how challenges shape understanding. You recognize how endings create space for growth. Buddhism teaches that wisdom arises when you stop resisting experience and start learning from it. Trust allows this learning to happen naturally. Life also begins to feel less personal in the sense of attack or failure. When difficulties arise, you no longer ask, "Why is this happening to me?" You ask, "What is happening right now?" This shift removes self-blame and victimhood. Buddhism teaches that seeing clearly without personalization reduces suffering. You stop carrying unnecessary emotional weight. Trust becoming your nature does not mean you never feel fear again. Fear may still arise, but it no longer dictates your actions. You acknowledge it without obeying it. You respond from awareness instead of reaction. Over time, fear loses authority because it is no longer reinforced. Trust becomes stronger through lived experience, not affirmation. Eventually, you realize that life was never asking you to carry so much tension. You were trying to protect yourself from uncertainty by tightening your grip. Trust loosens this grip. It allows you to participate in life fully without being crushed by it. You still plan, care, and commit, but without the constant background anxiety that once drained you. When trust becomes embodied, peace feels stable, not because life is predictable, but because you are grounded. You know you can meet what comes. You stop bracing for impact. You stop rehearsing disaster. You live more directly. Buddhism teaches that liberation is not escape from life. It is intimacy with life without fear. This stage is not an ending. It is a way of living. Trust continues to deepen as life unfolds. Each challenge becomes an opportunity to embody it more fully. Each moment of presence reinforces it. Over time, the heaviness you once carried fades into memory. When trust becomes your nature, life does not stop challenging you, it stops crushing you. You move through experience with steadiness, openness, and quiet strength. Worry no longer dominates because it no longer makes sense. Life is not something to survive, it is something to live. And in this living, lightness appears. Not because the world has changed, but because you have stopped resisting it from within. 15. When you stop resisting life completely, surrender becomes wisdom. At the deepest point of inner transformation, something profound yet gentle takes place. You no longer struggle to trust. You no longer work to let go. You no longer try to stay calm. Instead, surrender happens naturally, not as defeat, but as understanding. Buddhism teaches that true surrender is not giving up on life. It is giving up the fight against life. When resistance ends, wisdom begins to flow without effort. Most people misunderstand surrender because they associate it with weakness or passivity. They imagine surrender as lying down and allowing life to overpower them. Buddhism reveals a far subtler truth. Surrender is not collapse. It is clarity. It is the recognition that life does not need to be forced in order to unfold meaningfully. When you surrender wisely, you stop wasting energy on inner conflict and redirect it toward presence, compassion, and insight. For much of life, Worry trained you to stay tense. You believed tension was necessary to survive. You believed vigilance would keep you safe. Over time, this tension became familiar, even comforting. Buddhism teaches that what is familiar is not always what is healthy. When you stop resisting life completely, the body begins to unlearn this habit. Muscles soften, breathing deepens. The nervous system slowly realizes that constant defense is no longer required. Surrender changes how you experience control. You stop trying to control outcomes and start responding to reality. This response is not careless. It is attentive and grounded. You listen more carefully to what life is presenting instead of imposing your expectations on it. Buddhism teaches that wisdom arises from direct observation, not domination. When you surrender resistance, observation becomes clear. In this state, you begin to notice how much of your suffering was created by the need to be right, to be secure, to be certain. You were arguing with impermanence, arguing with uncertainty, arguing with change. Surrender ends the argument. When the argument ends, peace is no longer interrupted. You accept that life moves, shifts, and transforms whether you agree or not. Instead of fighting this truth, you align with it. Surrender also heals the relationship with fear. Fear does not disappear, but it loses its power to command. When fear arises, you no longer rush to silence it or obey it. You allow it to be present without resistance. Buddhism teaches that what is allowed loses its intensity. Fear feeds on avoidance and control. When met with surrender, it softens and passes. As surrender deepens, your actions become simpler and more honest. You no longer act from desperation or panic. You act from clarity. You stop forcing decisions when clarity is not ready. You wait without anxiety. This waiting is not passive, it is receptive. Buddhism describes this as non-doing, not inaction, but action aligned with timing. When the moment to move arrives, movement happens naturally. Surrender also transforms how you relate to effort and rest. You no longer feel guilty for resting or anxious when acting. Both become appropriate responses to the moment. Buddhism teaches that balance arises when effort and rest are no longer driven by fear. When surrender becomes wisdom, you trust yourself to know when to move and when to pause. This trust reduces exhaustion and restores vitality. Your relationship with success and failure also changes profoundly. Success no longer inflates the ego, failure no longer crushes the spirit. Both are seen as movements within the same flow. Buddhism teaches that clinging to either creates suffering. When surrender is present, you learn from success without attachment and from failure without shame. This freedom allows growth without fear. Surrender also brings humility, not humiliation, but realism. You recognize that you are part of a much larger process. You stop expecting life to revolve around your preferences. This humility is not self-erasure. It is self-honesty. You see yourself clearly without exaggeration or judgment. Buddhism teaches that humility is the doorway to wisdom because it opens the mind to learning. As surrender matures, compassion deepens naturally. When you stop resisting life, you stop resisting others. You recognize the shared human struggle with uncertainty and change. Judgment softens. Patience grows. You stop demanding perfection from yourself and from others. Buddhism teaches that compassion arises when the illusion of control dissolves. When no one is required to be flawless, understanding becomes possible. There is also a quiet joy that emerges from surrender. Not excitement, but contentment. You begin to feel at home in your own life. You stop wishing for a different moment. You appreciate what is present without clinging to it. Buddhism teaches that joy arises when craving and resistance fall away. Surrender removes both. Eventually, you realize that surrender was never about trusting life blindly. It was about trusting awareness itself. You trust that whatever arises can be met with presence. You trust that even when you do not understand, understanding will come through experience. This trust is not intellectual. It is embodied. It lives in the breath, the posture, the way you move through the world. At this stage, worry feels distant, almost foreign, not because you suppressed it, but because its foundation is gone. There is nothing left to protect against in the same way. Life is no longer perceived as an enemy or a test to pass. It is seen as a teacher, a process, a living flow you are part of. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment is not an escape from life, but intimacy with life without fear. Surrender as wisdom does not mean life becomes effortless. Challenges still arise, loss still happens, pain still visits. But the inner struggle that once multiplied suffering is gone. You meet difficulty without inner collapse. You grieve without drowning. You move forward without forcing. This is resilience born from understanding, not hardness. When surrender becomes wisdom, your presence itself becomes calm. You do not need to convince others of anything. You do not need to explain your peace. It is felt naturally. Your life becomes quieter, not because you withdraw from the world, but because the noise inside has settled. This is the quiet completion of the path away from worry. Not an ending, but a way of living. You continue to learn. You continue to grow. But you do so without inner resistance. Life is no longer something to manage anxiously. It is something to participate in with openness and respect. When you stop resisting life completely, surrender reveals itself not as loss, but as wisdom. And in that wisdom, peace is no longer something you seek. It is simply how you live. 16. When you stop carrying the weight of the mind, life becomes light again. At this stage of the journey, something quietly transformative settles into your experience. You are no longer trying to fix yourself. You are no longer trying to escape worry. You are no longer trying to become peaceful. Instead, peace remains naturally because the weight that once covered it has been set down. Buddhism teaches that suffering is not caused by life being heavy, but by the mind insisting on carrying what it was never meant to hold. When you stop carrying the weight of the mind, life becomes light again, not because circumstances change, but because your relationship to them does. For most of your life, the mind acted like a collector. It gathered memories, fears, regrets, expectations, identities, and imagined futures, then carried them all at once as if they were required for survival. This constant mental load created exhaustion that no amount of sleep could heal. Buddhism teaches that the mind is a useful tool, but a poor storage house. It was never meant to carry everything forever. When you learn to put things down, clarity returns. The weight of the mind is created by identification. You believed every thought was you. You believed every fear was important. You believed every memory required protection. This identification made the mind feel heavy and urgent. Buddhism gently reveals that thoughts are events, not identities. They arise and pass like clouds. When you stop carrying them forward, they lose their gravity. Life begins to feel spacious again. When mental weight drops, you notice it first in the body. The shoulders soften, the jaw relaxes, the breath deepens without effort. The body had been holding the tension of constant anticipation. Buddhism understands that the body and mind are not separate. When the mind releases its burden, the body receives the message. Safety returns, the nervous system recalibrates. This physical lightness is not imagined. It is the body remembering how to exist without threat. As the mind becomes lighter, your relationship with time transforms. You stop dragging yesterday into today. You stop carrying tomorrow like a warning. You meet the moment directly. Buddhism teaches that time only becomes heavy when it is compressed by worry. When you live one moment at a time, time regains its natural flow. Life no longer feels rushed or delayed. It feels appropriate. Letting go of mental weight also transforms how you relate to mistakes. When worry ruled, mistakes felt permanent. They felt like proof of inadequacy. Buddhism teaches that mistakes are movements within learning, not verdicts on your worth. When the mind is light, mistakes are processed and released. You learn, adjust, and continue without self-punishment. Growth becomes fluid instead of painful. You also stop carrying the emotional weight of others. When worry dominated, you may have felt responsible for how others felt, behaved, or judged you. This responsibility was never yours. Buddhism teaches that each being walks their own path shaped by their own causes and conditions. When you stop carrying others' expectations, your heart becomes free. You care without burden, you help without depletion. As the mind lightens, you stop rehearsing suffering. You no longer mentally relive painful moments to make sure they do not happen again. Buddhism teaches that awareness prevents repetition better than rumination ever could. When you are present, you respond intelligently. When you worry, you relive pain without benefit. Lightness comes from trusting awareness instead of memory. Life also begins to feel simpler, not because complexity disappears, but because unnecessary layers are removed. You stop over-interpreting events. You stop assigning hidden meanings to neutral moments. Buddhism teaches that simplicity is not reduction of life, but clarity of perception. When perception is clear, life feels manageable. With less mental weight, joy returns quietly. Not excitement, but ease. You find yourself smiling without reason. You enjoy ordinary moments again. Worry once stole these moments by keeping attention elsewhere. Now, attention rests where life is. Buddhism teaches that joy is not manufactured. It emerges when the mind stops obstructing it. You also notice that your actions become more natural. You no longer overthink every decision. You listen inwardly and respond. This responsiveness feels intelligent and grounded. Buddhism calls this intuitive wisdom. It does not come from analysis. It comes from presence. When the mind is light, wisdom moves freely. As inner lightness stabilizes, fear loses its authority. Fear may still appear, but it no longer feels heavy or convincing. You acknowledge it without carrying it forward. Buddhism teaches that fear is temporary energy. When it is not resisted or indulged, it passes. Lightness remains. Another subtle shift occurs in how you experience meaning. You stop searching for meaning as something separate from life. Meaning is found in participation, in caring, in awareness. Buddhism teaches that meaning arises naturally when you are fully present. When mental weight drops, life feels meaningful without explanation. At this stage, you are no longer trying to improve yourself through pressure. Growth happens through insight. You see clearly what needs to change and what does not. You release what no longer serves you without drama. This is maturity, not detachment. You are engaged, but not entangled. The mind, once a source of heaviness, becomes a quiet companion. You use it when needed and rest it when not. This balance is freedom. Buddhism teaches that liberation is not the destruction of the mind, but freedom from being ruled by it. Life does not become perfect here. Challenges continue. Loss still occurs, but you are no longer crushed by experience. You move through difficulty with steadiness. You carry only what is necessary. The rest is set down. When you stop carrying the weight of the mind, you discover something deeply reassuring. You were never meant to struggle this much. Peace was not absent. It was buried under mental effort. As effort relaxes, peace reveals itself naturally. This stage is not dramatic. It is quiet, ordinary, sustainable. You wake up lighter. You move through the day with less resistance. You rest without guilt. You act without fear. Buddhism teaches that this quiet freedom is the true fruit of the path. Life becomes light again, not because nothing matters, but because you are no longer carrying what was never yours to hold. 17. When you no longer seek peace, peace lives through you. At this point on the inner journey, something deeply subtle yet profoundly stable has taken root. You are no longer searching for peace. You are no longer practicing calm as a technique. You are no longer reminding yourself to let go. Peace is no longer something you reach for. It is something that moves through you naturally. Buddhism teaches that seeking peace can sometimes keep it away, because seeking implies lack. When seeking ends, what was always present is finally allowed to remain. Earlier in life, peace felt conditional. You believed you would be calm once problems were solved, once people changed, once certainty arrived, or once the future felt safe. This belief kept peace tied to circumstances. Buddhism gently reveals that peace tied to conditions will always be fragile. When you no longer seek peace, you stop making it dependent on outcomes. Peace becomes unconditional, not because life is easy, but because resistance has ended. This shift happens quietly. There is no dramatic moment where everything suddenly feels perfect. Instead, you begin to notice that situations which once triggered anxiety now pass through without disturbing your center. Thoughts still arise, but they do not pull you away. Emotions still appear, but they no longer overwhelm. Buddhism teaches that freedom is not the absence of experience. It is the absence of entanglement. You are experiencing life fully, but you are no longer caught inside it. When peace lives through you, your relationship with thought changes permanently. Thoughts no longer feel personal. They are recognized as movements of the mind, shaped by habit and conditioning. You do not argue with them or obey them automatically. You let them come and go. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is not found in perfect thinking, but in seeing thinking clearly. This clarity dissolves worry at its root. You also stop seeking reassurance. The need for constant confirmation fades because your stability no longer depends on external validation. You trust your own awareness. This trust is not arrogance. It is grounded confidence. You know that whatever arises can be met. This knowing creates deep relaxation in the nervous system. The body stops bracing for impact. You move through life without constant defense. When peace becomes embodied, time feels different. There is less urgency, less pressure, less mental rushing. You are not dragging the future toward you or pushing the present away. Buddhism teaches that urgency is fear disguised as importance. When fear softens, time opens. You experience moments fully instead of racing through them. This fullness brings quiet satisfaction. Your actions also change. You no longer act from anxiety or compulsion. You act when action is appropriate and rest when rest is appropriate. There is no guilt in either. Buddhism calls this right action, action aligned with awareness rather than fear. Life becomes efficient without being tense. You do less, but what you do carries more clarity. Relationships deepen in this state. When you are no longer seeking peace from others, you meet them without expectation. You listen without needing agreement. You care without attachment. This does not make you distant. It makes you present. Buddhism teaches that true connection arises when the need to control disappears. People feel safe around you because you are no longer projecting fear or demand. Peace living through you also changes how you experience pain. Pain is no longer resisted or dramatized. It is allowed to be felt fully and then released. Buddhism teaches that pain is unavoidable, but suffering is optional. When peace is stable, pain does not turn into identity. You feel it without becoming it. This is profound freedom. You also stop seeking meaning outside of living itself. Meaning no longer feels like something missing. It is found in awareness, in kindness, in sincerity. Buddhism teaches that meaning is not something added to life. It is revealed when life is lived without avoidance. When peace lives through you, even ordinary moments feel complete. At this stage, compassion flows naturally. Not forced compassion, but organic understanding. You see fear and confusion in others without judgment. You recognize yourself in them. This recognition softens the heart. Buddhism teaches that compassion arises when the illusion of separation dissolves. When you are at peace with yourself, you stop fighting the world. Another quiet shift occurs in how you relate to identity. You no longer cling to who you think you should be. You allow yourself to change. You stop protecting old versions of yourself out of fear. Buddhism teaches that identity is fluid. When you stop defending it, life flows more freely through you. Peace living through you does not mean you withdraw from life. It means you engage without being consumed. You still care. You still commit. You still feel. But you do so without the inner tension that once drained you. Life becomes participatory instead of overwhelming. At this stage, worry feels almost unnecessary, not because you have mastered life, but because you have stopped misinterpreting it. You see clearly that most of what you worried about never required your suffering to resolve. Awareness was always enough. This peace is resilient. It does not collapse when plans change. It does not disappear when uncertainty appears. Buddhism teaches that true peace is not fragile because it does not depend on control. It depends on understanding. Understanding remains even when circumstances shift. You may notice that silence feels comfortable now, not empty, not lonely, but full. Silence is no longer something to fill. It is something to rest in. Buddhism teaches that silence is the natural state of awareness when the mind is not agitated. In this silence, you feel connected rather than isolated. Eventually, you realize that the search for peace was part of the problem. Seeking implied that peace was elsewhere. Now you know it was never missing. It was obscured by effort, fear, and resistance. When these fall away, peace reveals itself effortlessly. This is not the end of the path. It is the beginning of living without inner struggle. Life continues to unfold with challenges and beauty, but you meet it differently now. You meet it without armor. When you no longer seek peace, peace lives through you, quietly, steadily, naturally. And from this place, life is no longer something to endure. It is something to live with clarity, compassion, and deep trust. 18. When you stop needing life to be different, life finally feels complete. At this depth of understanding, something quiet yet deeply stabilizing takes place. You no longer need life to change in order to feel whole. You no longer wait for the next improvement, the next solution, the next arrival to allow yourself peace. Buddhism teaches that suffering continues as long as the mind believes something essential is missing. When this belief dissolves, completeness reveals itself naturally, not because life is perfect, but because you are no longer at war with what is present. For most of life, the mind operated from a subtle hunger, a sense that something was lacking. More security, more certainty, more success, more clarity, more love. This hunger fueled worry. It convinced you that peace would come later, once conditions improved. Buddhism gently exposes this hunger as a misunderstanding, Life is not missing anything. The feeling of lack was created by comparison, expectation, and resistance. When you stop needing life note to be different, the hunger softens, and with it, worry fades. This shift does not mean you stop growing or learning. It means growth is no longer driven by dissatisfaction. You improve because you are alive, not because you feel incomplete. Buddhism teaches that growth rooted in lack creates endless striving. Growth rooted in wholeness creates balance. When life feels complete, effort becomes joyful instead of desperate. You move forward without dragging dissatisfaction behind you. When the need for life to be different dissolves, fear of loss also loosens its grip. Loss once felt terrifying because it threatened your sense of completeness. You believed that losing something would make you less. Buddhism teaches that nothing essential can be taken from awareness. Relationships may change, roles may end, circumstances may shift, but your capacity to be present, to feel, to respond, wisely remains. When you understand this, fear of loss softens. You appreciate what is here without clinging to it. This understanding changes how you experience desire. Desire no longer feels like a restless urge to escape the present. It becomes a gentle movement of interest. You may still want things, experiences, or growth, but these wants no longer carry the weight of identity. You are not using desire to fix yourself. Buddhism teaches that desire becomes suffering only when it is tied to the belief that happiness depends on fulfillment. When life feels complete, desire loses its urgency. As completeness settles, the mind becomes quieter, not empty, but content. You stop scanning the horizon for threats or missing pieces. You stop mentally rehearsing what needs to happen next. The present moment feels sufficient. This sufficiency does not numb ambition. It removes anxiety from ambition. You pursue what matters without believing your worth is at stake. Life also begins to feel more intimate. When you stop wishing it were different, you meet it fully. You taste food more deeply. You listen more carefully. You notice subtle beauty that worry once obscured. Buddhism teaches that appreciation arises naturally when craving and resistance subside. When the mind stops demanding more, it finally sees what is already here. This completeness also transforms how you relate to pain. Pain no longer feels like proof that something is wrong with life. It feels like part of life. Buddhism does not deny pain. It denies the need to interpret pain as failure. When you stop needing life to be different, pain becomes something you can hold with compassion rather than panic. You allow it to move through awareness without building an identity around it. Your relationship with the past also changes. Regret once fed on the belief that things should have gone differently. Buddhism teaches that every moment arose from countless causes and conditions. When you stop needing the past to be different, forgiveness becomes possible. Not forced forgiveness, but understanding. You see that you acted with the awareness you had then. This understanding releases shame and softens memory. Similarly, anxiety about the future dissolves when you stop demanding a different outcome. You still plan and prepare, but without emotional investment in specific results. Buddhism teaches that planning is wise, but clinging to plans creates suffering. When life feels complete now, the future no longer carries the burden of making you whole. It becomes a continuation, not a rescue. Completeness also deepens humility. You stop assuming that your personal preferences define how life should unfold. You recognize yourself as part of a much larger flow. This humility is not diminishing. It is grounding. Buddhism teaches that humility opens the heart because it removes the pressure to be in control. When you stop needing life to match your expectations, you rest more easily within it. Another quiet change appears in how you relate to others. When you no longer need life to be different, You no longer need people to be different to validate you. You allow them their complexity. You stop trying to extract peace from relationships. You give freely without demand. This does not make you passive. It makes your love lighter and more honest. Completeness also brings resilience. When difficulties arise, you are not shaken to the core. Challenges are met without the added layer of "why is this happening to me?" Buddhism teaches that suffering multiplies when experience is personalized. When you stop needing life to be different, experiences are met as they are. This reduces emotional shock and builds steadiness. At this stage, gratitude becomes effortless. Not gratitude as a practice, but gratitude as perception. You notice how much is already supporting you: breath, awareness, moments of stillness. Buddhism teaches that gratitude is the natural response of a mind no longer obsessed with lack. When life feels complete, appreciation flows without effort. You may also notice that silence feels full rather than empty. You are no longer uncomfortable with nothing happening. Stillness does not threaten you, it nourishes you. Buddhism teaches that discomfort with stillness often comes from the belief that something is missing. When completeness is understood, stillness feels like rest. Eventually, you realize that life was never asking you to fix it in order to belong. You belong because you are here. The sense of incompleteness that once drove worry was a mental habit, not a truth. When this habit dissolves, peace stabilizes. This does not mean you stop caring about the world. It means you care without desperation. You engage without needing outcomes to justify your existence. Buddhism teaches that this is freedom. Freedom from the constant sense of lack. Freedom from the belief that happiness is always somewhere else. When you stop needing life to be different, life finally feels complete, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. You wake up without urgency. You move through the day without inner argument. You rest without guilt. You act without fear. Nothing magical has changed externally, and yet everything feels different, because the struggle to make life something else has ended. In that ending, completeness reveals itself quietly, steadily, and without effort. 19. When the mind falls silent, life reveals its natural intelligence. At this depth of inner maturity, something quietly extraordinary begins to happen. The mind no longer narrates every moment. It no longer comments endlessly on what should change, what might go wrong, or what must be secured next. There is a growing silence inside, not forced, not practiced, not maintained through effort, but naturally present. Buddhism teaches that this silence is not emptiness. It is intelligence without noise. When the mind falls silent, life begins to reveal itself with clarity that thought could never provide. For most of your life, the mind acted as a constant interpreter. Every experience passed through layers of judgment, memory, fear, and expectation. A simple moment was never allowed to be simple. It had to be explained, evaluated, or compared. This mental commentary created the illusion that thinking was necessary for living. Buddhism teaches that thought is useful, but awareness is primary. When the mind relaxes its grip, awareness steps forward, and life is perceived directly rather than conceptually. When inner silence becomes stable, worry loses its final refuge. Worry depends on mental noise. It survives by repeating questions, creating stories, and projecting imagined futures. In silence, these mechanisms cannot operate. The mind still functions when needed, but it no longer dominates experience. You think when thinking serves clarity. You rest when it does not. This balance brings profound relief. Silence also changes how you experience decision-making. Decisions no longer feel heavy or urgent. You sense when action is required without mentally rehearsing every possible outcome. Buddhism teaches that intuitive wisdom, arises from stillness, not analysis. When the mind is quiet, perception sharpens. You notice subtle cues. You feel when something aligns or does not. This knowing is calm and grounded. It does not shout. It does not rush. As inner silence deepens, the body responds with ease. The constant microtension created by thinking subsides. Breathing becomes slower and fuller. The nervous system shifts out of survival mode. Buddhism understands that silence is not only mental, it is physiological. When the mind stops scanning for danger, the body remembers safety. This embodied calm becomes your new baseline. In silence, emotions also behave differently. They arise without drama and pass without resistance. You feel sadness without storytelling. You feel joy without clinging. Buddhism teaches that emotions become overwhelming only when they are fed by thought. In silence, emotions move like weather across the sky of awareness. They are experienced fully, then released naturally. Another profound shift occurs in how you relate to meaning. When the mind was noisy, meaning felt like something to be found, defined, or constructed. In silence, meaning is lived rather than explained. You do not ask why life matters. You feel that it does. Buddhism teaches that meaning arises from presence, not interpretation. When you are fully here, life feels meaningful without explanation. Inner silence also dissolves comparison. Comparison is a mental activity that requires constant commentary. Who is ahead? Who is behind? Who is better? Who is lacking? In silence, these comparisons have no fuel. You experience your life directly without measuring it against others. This directness restores dignity and self-respect. You no longer need to justify your pace or path. When the mind falls silent, time changes texture. It no longer feels like something chasing you or escaping you. Moments feel spacious. You are not rushing through experience to reach the next one. Buddhism teaches that time pressure is created by mental projection. In silence, time returns to its natural rhythm. You move with it instead of against it. Silence also transforms how you relate to suffering. Suffering no longer feels personal or catastrophic. Pain is felt, but it is not multiplied by inner commentary. You stop asking why this is happening to me. You stop turning discomfort into identity. Buddhism teaches that much suffering comes not from pain itself, but from resistance and narrative. Silence removes both. Another quiet change appears in your relationship with others. You listen more deeply because you are not preparing responses or judgments internally. Presence becomes your way of relating. People feel seen and heard without effort. Buddhism teaches that true communication happens beyond words. When the mind is silent, connection becomes natural. Inner silence also brings humility, not as a concept, but as a lived understanding. You realize that life does not need your constant interpretation to function. You are part of something larger, moving intelligently on its own. This realization softens the ego. You stop trying to control life through thought. You participate instead. As silence stabilizes, gratitude becomes wordless. You do not think thank you. You feel it. There is appreciation without commentary, a sense of being supported without explanation. Buddhism teaches that gratitude is not a practice. It is the natural response of a mind no longer consumed by lack. Silence does not mean the absence of challenges. Life continues to present difficulties, but you meet them differently now. Without inner noise, you respond with clarity instead of panic. You act without hesitation, yet without force. This responsiveness feels intelligent, not reactive. At this stage, peace is not something you notice often, because it is no longer contrasted with agitation. It is simply the atmosphere you live in. Silence does not feel special, it feels normal. This normality is the sign of deep integration. You may notice that you speak less, not out of withdrawal, but out of precision. Words are used when necessary and left aside when not. Buddhism teaches that silence is not absence. It is presence without excess. When speech arises from silence, it carries weight and sincerity. Eventually you realize that the mind was never meant to dominate your life. It was meant to serve awareness. When the mind falls silent, awareness leads. Life feels guided rather than managed, supported rather than threatened. This silence is not fragile. It does not break when thoughts appear. Thoughts come and go, but silence remains underneath. You rest in that silence without effort. It holds you even when experience shifts. At this stage, worry feels unnecessary, almost illogical. Not because life is predictable, but because clarity is present. You no longer mistake thought for reality. You no longer confuse noise with intelligence. When the mind falls silent, life reveals its natural intelligence. You see how things unfold without your interference. You trust this unfolding because you have witnessed it directly, not as belief, but as experience. This is not an ending. It is a way of living. A life guided by presence rather than commentary. A life where peace is not maintained, but lived. A life where silence speaks louder than fear ever did. 20. When you are no longer divided inside, life begins to flow. Naturally, at this stage of the journey, there is a deep and steady sense of inner unity. The feeling of being pulled in different directions begins to fade. You are no longer torn between who you are and who you think you should be. You are no longer split between fear and hope, effort and rest, control and surrender. Buddhism teaches that much of human suffering comes from inner division, when the mind argues with the heart, when desire fights reality, when thought resists experience, tension is born. When this division dissolves, life begins to flow with a natural ease that cannot be forced. For much of your life, you lived in fragments. One part of you wanted peace, another chased certainty. One part wanted to rest, another demanded productivity. One part trusted life, another doubted everything. This inner conflict created exhaustion. Even moments of success felt heavy because they were achieved through struggle. Buddhism gently reveals that wholeness does not come from winning inner battles. It comes from ending them. When inner division dissolves, you stop negotiating with yourself constantly. You no longer need to justify rest or force action. What needs to be done becomes clear, and what does not need to be done falls away naturally. This clarity does not come from rules or discipline. It comes from alignment. Your actions match your understanding. Your understanding matches your experience. Life feels coherent rather than chaotic. This inner unity also changes how you experience emotions. Emotions are no longer resisted by thought or exaggerated by fear. They are felt fully and allowed to pass. Sadness does not argue with acceptance. Joy does not fight impermanence. Buddhism teaches that emotions become painful only when one part of the mind rejects what another part is experiencing. When the mind is unified, emotions move freely without creating suffering. As division fades, the body responds immediately. The constant background tension created by internal conflict releases. You may notice a sense of groundedness, as if your feet are more firmly connected to the earth. Breathing becomes natural and unforced. The body no longer feels pulled between vigilance and collapse. Buddhism understands this as the body recognizing safety through inner coherence. When you are no longer divided, decision-making becomes simple. Not simplistic, but clear. You are not debating endlessly between options driven by fear. You listen inwardly and act. If a decision leads to difficulty, you adjust without self-attack. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is flexible, it adapts. Inner division creates rigidity. Unity allows responsiveness. Life also begins to feel less personal in the sense of offense or threat. When something does not go your way, there is no inner argument insisting that it should have gone differently. You meet experience as information rather than judgment. This does not mean passivity. It means clarity without emotional charge. Buddhism teaches that non-resistance does not weaken action. It purifies it. Another subtle transformation occurs in how you relate to effort. When inner division ruled, effort felt heavy because one part of you was pushing while another resisted. Now effort feels clean. You do what needs to be done without inner commentary. When the task is complete, you rest without guilt. This balance restores vitality. Buddhism teaches that energy is lost not through action, but through inner struggle. As unity stabilizes, you stop switching between masks. You are not one person in private and another in public. You are not constantly managing impressions. There is less performance and more presence. Buddhism teaches that authenticity arises naturally when fear of judgment fades. When you are no longer divided, you do not need to defend a self-image. You simply live. Relationships deepen in this state. You relate from wholeness rather than need. You listen without preparing defenses. You speak without trying to control outcomes. This does not mean relationships become perfect. It means they become honest. Buddhism teaches that true connection arises when inner conflict is not projected outward. You also stop living with the sense that life is somewhere else. When inner division dissolves, attention remains where you are. You are no longer waiting for the next phase to begin your real life. This moment is not a placeholder. It is life itself. Buddhism teaches that postponing presence is a subtle form of suffering. Unity ends postponement. As life flows more naturally, trust becomes effortless. You do not need to remind yourself to trust. Trust is the absence of inner resistance. You see clearly that, when you are aligned within yourself, life responds with coherence. Challenges still arise, but they do not throw you into confusion. You meet them as a whole person, not a divided one. Another quiet shift appears in how you experience purpose. Purpose no longer feels like a destination to reach. It feels like participation. You do what is meaningful because it is meaningful now, not because it leads somewhere else. Buddhism teaches that purpose is revealed through presence, not projection. When you are no longer divided, purpose expresses itself through your actions, naturally. You may notice that silence and activity feel equally complete. You do not need constant stimulation to feel alive. You also do not fear engagement. Both stillness and movement arise from the same centered place. Buddhism teaches that balance is not achieved by controlling extremes, but by dissolving the inner split that creates them. At this stage, worry has no place to return to. Worry requires inner conflict. It feeds on doubt, resistance, and fragmentation. When the inner world is unified, worry has nothing to attach to. Thoughts may arise, but they do not spiral. Fear may appear, but it does not dominate. Everything is met from the same grounded awareness. This unity does not make you rigid or closed. It makes you flexible and open. Because you are no longer protecting different parts of yourself from each other, you can meet change without collapse. Buddhism teaches that true strength comes from coherence, not control. A unified mind adapts easily. Life does not become quiet in a dramatic way. It becomes quiet in a reliable way. There is a steady hum of presence underneath experience. This presence does not leave when things go wrong. It remains because it is not dependent on conditions. Buddhism points to this as the natural state uncovered when inner conflict ends. You may still grow, learn, and change, but these movements feel integrated. You are not trying to escape yourself. You are expressing yourself. This expression feels sincere and unforced. Life flows through you rather than being managed by you. When you are no longer divided inside, life stops feeling like something you must constantly adjust to. It feels like something you are already part of. You move with it, not against it. You trust it, not because you believe it will always be easy, but because you are no longer fighting yourself as it unfolds. This is the quiet flowering of the path away from worry. Not a peak experience, but a stable way of living. Inner unity allows life to flow naturally, gently, and intelligently. And in that flow, peace is not something you hold on to. It is simply how life moves through you. If you look back now, you may begin to see something that was difficult to notice while you were worrying. Nothing was ever truly broken. Nothing was ever completely off track. What felt like chaos was often adjustment. What felt like delay was often preparation. What felt like loss was often space being created for something more aligned. Buddhism teaches that suffering clouds perception and clarity returns only when resistance softens. As resistance has softened through these teachings, a deeper truth has quietly revealed itself. Life was never against you. It was always shaping you. Worry once made life feel urgent, fragile, and overwhelming. It convinced you that peace had to be earned, protected, or postponed. It told you that something was missing and needed to be fixed before you could rest. Now, after walking through these lessons, you may notice that peace does not arrive through control. It arrives through understanding. The moment you stop arguing with reality, the moment you stop demanding certainty from an uncertain world, something inside relaxes. In that relaxation, life begins to make sense without explanation. Buddhism does not promise a life without pain, change, or difficulty. It offers something far more reliable: freedom from unnecessary suffering. You may still face challenges. You may still experience loss. You may still feel fear or sadness at times. But you are no longer lost inside them. You no longer build your identity around them. You meet each experience with awareness instead of resistance. This is not avoidance. This is wisdom. Throughout this journey, you have learned that worry was never protecting you. It was exhausting you. You have seen that control was never security. It was tension. You have discovered that letting go is not weakness, but alignment. That trust is not blind belief, but lived understanding. That peace does not come from fixing life, but from meeting it fully as it is. These realizations do not disappear once learned. They settle quietly and reshape how you live. You may notice that you breathe more deeply now, that your thoughts no longer rush as desperately, that silence feels less threatening and more nourishing, that you no longer feel the need to solve your entire life in one moment. These are not small changes. They are signs that something fundamental has shifted. You are no longer living from fear of what might happen. You are living from presence with what is happening. Life does not need to be forced. It responds to openness. When you stop pushing against it, you feel its natural intelligence at work. Things unfold in ways you could not have planned. Answers arrive when you are ready to receive them. Clarity comes not through effort, but through stillness. This does not make life predictable. It makes it trustworthy. You trust not because you know the outcome, but because you know you can meet whatever comes with steadiness. As this understanding deepens, you stop postponing your life. You stop telling yourself that peace will come later. You stop waiting for the perfect moment to feel okay. You live now, fully, gently, honestly. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment is not somewhere else. It is the end of unnecessary struggle right where you are. When you stop worrying, not by force but by insight, you realize that life was already enough. Nothing about this path requires perfection. You do not need to maintain constant calm or suppress human emotion. Thoughts will still arise. Fear may still visit. But now you recognize them as passing experiences, not truths you must obey. Each time you return to awareness, peace strengthens. Each time you let go again, trust deepens. This is not a one-time realization. It is a way of living. In the end, there is nothing you need to add to yourself to be complete. Nothing you need to become to deserve peace. Nothing you need to fix before life can begin. You are already part of the same flow that moves the seasons, shapes mountains, and carries rivers to the sea. When you stop worrying, you stop standing apart from that flow. You move with it. Everything is quietly falling into place, not because life suddenly became perfect, but because you learned how to stop standing in its way. Trust life a little more. Trust yourself a little more. Rest when rest is needed. Act when action is clear. Let go when holding hurts. This is the middle way Buddhism points toward. Balanced, gentle, awake. And from this place, life does not need to make sense all at once. It only needs to be lived.